So we're on to the last two expenses of a winery that I think are the critical expenses in the success or profitability of a winery. Those two expenses are going to be your cost of goods sold, which are basically the cost of growing the grapes, the cost of making the wine, and the cost of bottling the wine, and then marketing that. So the two separate costs, the cost of goods sold and then the marketing. So cost of goods sold, again, you may not have a vineyard, in which case, well, you still have to buy wine from somewhere and get it to your winery, which is not going to be cheap. So I would say if you don't have a vineyard and you're still making wine, probably the main cost you have is the cost of that wine. Is it quality wine? How are you getting it to your winery? Did it spoil on the way? It's very expensive to do that, and you don't always have control over the grapes. There are some wineries that specifically buy grapes from a vineyard. The vineyard does this as part of their model is they just grow the grapes and then sell them, or they grow grapes and start the process of making the wine and then sell unfinished wine. So you certainly can get wine that way or get grapes that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's cheaper or better. It's just becomes part of your cost of goods sold. And if that's the way you're doing it, it's probably going to be the most significant cost you have in your winery, just like growing grapes is probably the most significant cost. But within the growing and the making and the bottling of wine, you're probably still going to be able to drill down in there and find one specific cost that is more significant and a bigger factor than all the rest. And usually, I've been with a couple of agricultural firms, and usually the fertilizer is a big expense. And again, I'm the first to tell you, I have no idea how to grow anything, grapes, whatever, any product or fruit or vegetable. I'm not a grower, I'm not a farmer, and I certainly don't know how to make wine. So determining what these specific costs are at your winery or your vineyard really is going to be up to your vineyard manager or your viticulturalist, as to what is the driving cost of that portion of your business. An accountant, all they really can tell you is what the biggest cost is. If you say, go to your accountant and say, where are we spending too much in growing grapes? And they say, well, fertilizer is your biggest cost. That doesn't necessarily mean that your cost of fertilizer is causing the problem, because you may need fertilizer to grow the grapes. You may have to use that. So it's not necessarily identifying the biggest cost as being the factor. It's just a matter of knowing how to grow grapes and knowing how to make wine. You're going to be better off identifying a significant cost from your knowledge of doing those things. I wouldn't rely on your accountant to tell you what is the problem, because all they're going to tell you is what the largest cost is, and that may not necessarily be the problem. And I'll kind of give you an example of this. When I was in California, we had a neighboring winery that did not water their grapes. And of course, they had the marketing of that was, the grapes taste better, when they're struggling to whatever, it makes them sweeter. They had all the stuff, all the talk about it, but the reality is they just didn't want to spend money on irrigation, and they, had to get by without watering their plants. So obviously, if an accountant looked at their costs of growing the grapes, they'd be like, wow, you don't use any water at all. That's great. You guys are saving a bunch of money. But is it great? I mean, if your harvest yield is low, maybe you need to be watering the crops, the grapes. So just because there isn't an expense or the expense is low doesn't mean it's necessarily good. And if the expense is high, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's really the reliance on what is a driving factor in terms of the cost of goods sold of your grapes is going to come down to your vineyard manager and your winemaker telling you what these problems are, or what they think the problems are. And you're going to have to rely on them, just like you would rely on your accountant to do your bookkeeping and accounting for you. So hopefully you have a good farm manager, and hopefully you have a good winemaker that can identify those problems. The cost of bottling is actually a little easier to address, because you can change around the quality of the bottles that you buy. You can change around the corking, and you can even not use bottles if you have a target customer that doesn't care if wine comes in a bottle or not. that's all comes back to my question in the beginning of, do you know who your target customer is and what kind of wine they want? A lot of that can be adjusted through the cost of bottling, and that might be a place where you need to look and say, am I really in the highest, demographic of wine drinkers? Are they, concerned about having a real cork? Are they concerned about having a cork at all? Maybe they don't care if it's a twist top bottle. And so, it really comes down to the knowledge, specifically with bottling, of who is my target customer. Another area where that comes into play, which was kind of a big deal back when I was at a winery, was using oak barrels versus stainless steel. And again, this comes down to, who's your target customer? Do they expect to have an oaky flavor, or do they, are they not sophisticated enough to know that there's an oak flavor in the wine at all? It's obviously cheaper to use stainless steel. They last longer, but a sophisticated wine drinker will be able to notice that lack of oaky flavor in the wine. And if that's your target customer, you don't want to do that. But again, there's an area where, okay, we're making a decision. Do we make the wine with oak barrels, or do we invest in stainless steel barrels because they're going to last longer, all that kind of stuff. So again, I'm not the person to probably make those suggestions, because I'm not a wine maker or a farmer, but those are kinds of questions you might want to be asking of those people. So the last area is marketing. And this, I think, is a critical area because it basically determines selling your wine. Some of this would be advertising. You might have a wholesale network, which means you're considering having a salesperson. So we're going to discuss the marketing cost. Technically, your entire tasting room is a marketing cost, but I don't think you should account for your tasting room under the marketing account. I think you should have a separate tasting room account, and I've already discussed that. But yes, if you're only selling wine via a tasting room, it is your sole marketing cost, but you can track that under the tasting room. But let's assume you have multiple wine clubs and you're doing wholesale distribution or something like that, and you're thinking about, okay, I have some marketing costs here. Again, I will say the couple questions you need to ask yourself, and we did this in the revenue thing, is who is my target customer and how much am I willing to spend to add one new loyal customer? Those two questions will drive your revenue and drive your marketing costs. If you know that it takes, or you're willing to spend, let's say $15 to add one new loyal customer, then you can target your marketing cost to fit that expense. If it's $100, well, then you got to look at different types of marketing, because that's a pretty expensive cost. And again, we covered a lot of this under the revenue aspect of things. But I think that the area where small wineries have a difficult decision is, should I hire a salesperson to go out and sell wine? Well, they're going to sell it, wholesale. That's what a salesperson's doing. They're not going to go sell it retail, because that's what your tasting room does. So hiring a salesperson is really a matter of, do we want to have a wholesale distribution revenue stream? Again, I would say no. If I were to advise a winery, I'd say I wouldn't go that route, but that doesn't mean it's bad. If you have a very vibrant wholesale distribution network, it can be very profitable, and a salesperson may help you get there. But I think you need to look at some numbers about a salesperson. A good salesperson is probably going to cost you $100,000, if not more, $120,000. And there's going to be the all-in costs of payroll taxes, vacation time that you're paying them, that they're not doing any sales. There's going to be their expense accounts, blah, blah, blah. Then there's time of supervising them. So the reality is the all-in cost of hiring one salesperson is probably close to $150,000. So let's just take some simple numbers. Let's say the cost of your wine and a bottle of wine, let's just actually say a case. The cost to grow and make and bottle a case of wine for your winery is $100. I know it's not, but let's just, for argument's sake here, for the example, it's $100. And you can sell that for $200 wholesale or $300 retail, just to throw out some numbers. So if you're going to sell it for $200 wholesale, that means you're getting $100 per case profit margin on that case. So to justify the cost of a $150,000 salesperson, that salesperson needs to sell 1,500 cases just to cover their cost. Well, most small wineries are only selling 2,000, 3,000 to 5,000 cases. So this would be a significant increase in the number of cases you're selling just to cover that cost. There's no overhead there. If they needed to get, to contribute another 50,000 to overhead, meaning they're paying for the accountant, they're paying for some of your pay, they're paying for electricity and the building, and not the cost of the wine, but everything other than the cost of the wine, that salesperson needs to sell 3,000 cases of wine. So you start to look at it from that perspective, and it's like, wow, salesperson is a significant investment on my part, and are they actually contributing to the profitability of my winery, my small winery? And when you think about that, it's like, okay, I'm spending $150,000 for a salesperson, and he's selling 2,000 cases of wine. My immediate response to that would be, if I were advising this winery, well, how much are you paying for your tasting room? How much is the rent? How much is the labor? Factor in the cost of the wine. How much wine are they selling? Because the tasting room's getting $300, so they're making $200 a case in this example, and they may be only costing you $150,000 as well, maybe more like $200,000. But if they're selling, 1,000 cases, they're making $200,000. So you really have to look at it from the perspective of, is a salesperson going to justify their cost because they are expensive, or should I focus my marketing dollars on the tasting room? So yeah, there's some critical aspects in decision making and marketing about hiring a salesperson, but I think that there's other areas that you can focus your marketing. Another area that's popular these days is influencers and affiliate marketing. I've used influencers with some of the companies I have worked for, and it was not my decision, but I didn't think the payoff was that good. And again, the analysis simply, how much am I going to pay for one new loyal customer? The direct marketing where you send out a little flyer in the mail has had a pretty historical response of 2.5% to get someone to buy. Now, are those 2.5%? So if you send out 1,000, you get 25 people buying or responding. Of that 25, how many of them become loyal customers? You're probably lucky to get 2, so it's a very low number, but you look at an influencer. An influencer is basically a direct marketing concept. If I'm going to pay an influencer $25,000, how many people are going to buy my product, and how many of them are going to be loyal customers? Again, $5,000 seems like a lot of money for an influencer, but right now, that means that they have less followers than you would think. You could send out a lot more flyers in the mail for $25,000 than an influencer probably has followers. And I don't think the response is any different. So again, maybe we use the wrong influencers. That's, a question you have, but it's out there. It's a decision. And just keep in mind, I personally think that people who are watching influencers, so if you had a popular wine drinker, whatever, blogger or something, try your wine, you're going to have to pay them. And I think people realize this person's getting paid to promote this wine, so what relevance does their opinion have over anything? Why should I listen to this person? Maybe I've liked their wines or whatever, their restaurants in the past, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they trust this person because the person's getting paid. So the reality is, the best influencer you have as a winery and any company is your existing loyal customers. Their referrals are going to mean a lot more because they're not getting paid. They're advocates for your product because they actually like your product and want to tell other people about it. Which kind of brings us to affiliate marketing. There's been a lot of discussion. How do we reward our loyal customers? Well, we can set up an affiliate marketing program, which means if they're, on your website or whatever, click on a link and they buy some product, and then you can trace it back to, whoever the website was that brought them there, and you probably can do it through, their phone numbers and all sorts of stuff. But basically, the customer, your loyal customer, signs up and says, I'm willing to be an affiliate marketer for you, which means I'm going to go sell your product for commissions, and I will try to get people to buy your product through, my links or my, text messages or my social media accounts or whatever. But again, it comes back to the same problem of do I want my friends that I trust for their opinions to all of a sudden start trying to sell me stuff that they like? I'm a big fan of Dr. Pepper. It's like, do I want my friends to buy Dr. Pepper because I text them every day, I'm drinking my Dr. Pepper, I love it, they have a new flavor, blah, blah, blah. I don't think any of them care. And in fact, I think it would be a real turnoff to do it that way, where you get your loyal customers to all of a sudden try to push your products when it's not organic, it's not grassroots. They're not doing it naturally out of, we went to this tasting room this weekend and we love this wine and we want to share it with you over dinner. That's a much more meaningful way for a loyal customer to refer your product, and it's going to last a lot longer. The question is always going to be, how do you get your loyal customers to do that? Again, I discussed this in the increasing revenue side. I really think that there's a target list group of customers that feel unloved, so to speak, unappreciated. The middle income market spends a lot of money on stuff, and yet they don't get a whole lot of rewards. There's, of course, like the loyalty cards and all that kind of stuff for how much the loyal customer buys, but there's not a whole lot of rewards for how much they're referring your product to other people, which is really the more valuable aspect. Of course, you can reward them for buying your product, but how do you reward them when they refer your product without it being weird? Like, your cell phone, we'll give you 1 free month if you refer our cell phone company to one of your friends. Well, again, that's not really an organic way to refer customers, and quite frankly, 1 free month of cell phones is not worth, me referring my cell phone company to one of my friends. It's like, what's the point of that? So, again, there are probably ways to do that. I wish I knew some great ways to do it, but I think you just got to look at your loyal customers and keep appreciating them as much as they can, and implement some aspect in your tasting room where you talk to your loyal customers and get feedback from them and take notes as to, hey, did you, have our wine with any friends lately? And if so, who were they? And you just kind of keep the conversations going without it being a forceful, like, refer our wine more. I don't think anybody really wants to be forced to share their opinions with people, and you certainly don't want to feel like someone's opinions being forced on you about something that you should be buying when you don't really know anything about that product. Certainly some aspects there to marketing that might be worthwhile, but the current situation is you can look at affiliate marketing, you can look at influencer, you can look at direct marketing. There are some costs there, but again, I went through some ideas on the revenue side of how would I spend my marketing dollar if I knew that I'm willing to spend $50, or if I knew $50 is all it took to find a new loyal customer. What can I do with that $50 that might be different than the standard ways of marketing my product? So that's why I think the marketing expense, while it may be a very small percentage of your gross revenue, it's a very important percentage because it is the one number that is really giving you more customers and more revenue. And so the better you manage that, the better off you're going to be. And the simple management of that is the question, how much are you willing to spend to get one new loyal customer? It's one I asked numerous times, probably in 5 of the podcasts I've asked that question, and I think it's something every winery owner needs to ask themselves. So that pretty much concludes it. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to provide any insight that I may have about winery operations and winery accounting, but just don't ask me how to grow grapes or make wine because I really don't know. But thanks for listening. Bye.